My name is John Miller. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Texas, an oil field engineer who spent half his life offshore in the Gulf. 6 years of marriage, a house in suburban Houston, a Ford F-150 parked in the driveway, barbecue grill out back, the kind of life any man in my shoes would have been proud of. I thought I'd built something solid, until the night it cracked wide open. My wife, Sarah, cheated. Not just a fling, she got pregnant by her boss, David Collins. And when our daughter was born, she looked me in the eye, with both our mothers standing there in Houston Methodist Hospital, and told me to sign as the father. The birth certificate sat on the table, pen in reach, everyone waiting for me to scribble away 18 years of my life. Instead, I looked at them all and said, calm and steady, "Not yet. We wait for the DNA." And that's when the room froze. I'm John Miller, 38 years old, born and raised in Texas, and for the last 15 years I've worked as an offshore engineer in the Gulf of Mexico. It's not the kind of job you do halfway. Weeks at sea on a rig the size of a small town, steel decks vibrating under your boots, the smell of salt and diesel in the air. Then a few short days back home before shipping out again. That rhythm shaped my life. Long stretches of hard work, then bursts of normal life I tried to cram into weekends. Back home in Houston, I had the picture most men dream about. A solid paycheck, a modest house in the suburbs, a Ford F-150 parked in the driveway, the grill always ready for a Saturday cookout. I thought that stability meant safety. I thought Sarah understood the sacrifices. But while I was keeping the rigs running, something else was happening back home, something I never saw coming. Working offshore isn't just a job, it's a lifestyle that swallows whole chunks of your life. 2, sometimes 3 weeks at a time out on the rig, surrounded by nothing but steel and ocean. The days blur together, sunrise over the Gulf, 12-hour shifts, meals in the galley that all taste the same. You come back to your bunk exhausted, ears still ringing from machinery, and the only connection to home is a shaky satellite call that cuts out when the weather turns. Sarah used to say she admired the grit it took, that she was proud of me for providing. And I believed her. Every paycheck I wired home felt like proof I was doing right by us, even if it meant missing birthdays, cookouts, quiet nights together. What I didn't see was the cost of those absences. While I was fighting storms at sea, there were storms building in my own house, ones I wouldn't recognize until it was too late. Sarah and I had been married 6 years. On paper, it looked like the kind of marriage people in my neighborhood envied. A 2-story house in a quiet subdivision outside Houston, the kind with trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes down the street, and backyard barbecues on Sunday afternoons. My Ford F-150 sat in the driveway like a badge of hard work, and every neighbor knew I spent my weeks offshore earning the kind of paycheck that kept the lights on and the mortgage paid. Sarah had her circle of friends, book clubs, weekend yoga. She'd host small dinners, laugh loud in the kitchen while I manned the grill. To anyone looking in, we were solid, stable, comfortable, the couple that had figured it out. I told myself the distance from my work didn't matter because home always felt intact when I came back. But what I didn't realize was that comfort can cover cracks, and love can look steady even as it starts to slip away. Family was always close to the center of our marriage, even when work kept me away. My mom, Margaret, a retired school teacher, lived just a few miles down the road. She was the kind of woman who believed in discipline, tradition, and the power of keeping your word. If I had a backbone of steel, it was forged in her kitchen. Sarah's mother, Karen Collins, was different, sharper, more outspoken, the kind of woman who made her presence felt the second she walked into a room. She doted on Sarah, often treating her less like a grown woman and more like a daughter who still needed protecting. I respected Karen, but I could see how her influence gave Sarah a shield, an unspoken confidence that her mother would back her no matter what. The two women didn't clash, but they weren't cut from the same cloth either. That tension mattered later, because when everything fell apart, they were both standing on opposite sides of me. For a long time, I told myself our marriage was steady. We had our routines, our rhythms, the little rituals that make life feel normal. Saturday mornings meant coffee on the porch. Sunday afternoons meant firing up the grill, the smell of mesquite drifting over the fence while neighbors stopped by for a beer. Sarah and I had our share of small arguments, bills, schedules, the usual, but nothing that ever made me doubt the foundation we stood on. At night, when I was home from the rigs, I'd fall asleep next to her thinking this was it, the American dream in its simplest form. A house, a truck, a woman who smiled when I walked through the door. Stability wrapped in everyday life. Looking back, it feels almost dangerous how normal it all seemed. Because sometimes peace isn't peace at all. Sometimes it's just the quiet before the first crack splits wide open. For years, the idea of children floated in and out of our conversations like a dream we weren't quite ready to chase. Sarah would linger over strollers at Target, run her hand along the soft fabric of baby clothes, then laugh it off like it was just curiosity. I'd tell her, one day, when the timing's right, and she'd nod, half patient, half disappointed. 6 years into the marriage, the talk became serious. We were in our early 30s, friends of ours already had toddlers running around backyards, and Sunday dinners started to feel quieter without the sound of little feet. I remember Sarah saying, if we wait much longer, it might never happen. And I felt that too. So we agreed. It was time. Time to stop talking and start building the family we'd always pictured. I thought that decision would bring us closer. I thought it meant we were stepping into something unshakable. I still remember the night Sarah told me she was pregnant. I'd just come back from a 2-week hitch offshore, clothes still smelling faintly of salt and diesel. She met me at the door with this strange, nervous energy, smiling, but not the usual smile. I dropped my duffel by the couch and asked what was going on. She handed me a small white box wrapped clumsily with tissue paper. Inside was a tiny pair of baby socks. For a second, I didn't understand. Then she whispered, "John, we're going to be parents." It hit me like a wave, relief, pride, excitement, all tangled together. I pulled her into my arms, heart pounding like I'd just stepped off a drilling deck. For years we'd circled the idea, and now it was real. That night I couldn't stop picturing the future. A nursery painted soft yellow, a crib by the window, the sound of a baby's laugh echoing through our quiet house. I thought life had just shifted into something better. Those first weeks after Sarah's announcement felt golden. I cut back on offshore rotations, switching to more office work so I could be home. We spent our evenings in the spare bedroom, transforming it into a nursery. The walls went soft yellow, sunlight catching the fresh paint while I stood on a ladder rolling color into every corner. Sarah sat cross-legged on the carpet, flipping through a baby name book, reading them out loud like each one carried a future. Weekends became trips to baby stores, testing cribs, comparing strollers, arguing playfully over which blanket pattern looked less ridiculous. I caught myself daydreaming about coming home from work to hear a baby's cry down the hall, about rocking a little one to sleep in the chair we'd just bought. For the first time in years, I felt settled. All the long nights offshore, all the sacrifices, they suddenly seemed worth it. We weren't just building a room, we were building a family. Through it all, I trusted Sarah completely. When I was offshore, I never questioned what she did with her days. If she said she was meeting friends for coffee, I believed her. If she stayed late at the office, I told myself she was just being responsible. That's what marriage was supposed to mean. Faith without suspicion. I saw the way her eyes lit up when she held up tiny onesies in the store, or when she paused in the half-finished nursery and smiled like she could already see our future there. I told myself those were the signs of a woman happy in her marriage, excited to be a mother. At night, I'd rest a hand on her stomach, feeling the faintest kick, and whisper, "We're ready for this." She'd nod, squeeze my hand, and I believed it was the truth. Looking back, I realized trust can blind you. But in those days, I thought nothing could shake us. The day finally came at Houston Methodist Hospital. I remember the sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with faint traces of newborn powder drifting through the halls. Sarah's labor was rough, hours of sweat, pain, and clenched hands. But when that tiny cry finally filled the room, it was like the whole world stopped. They placed our daughter in Sarah's arms, and for a moment I forgot everything else. Her face softened in a way I'd never seen before, as if every hardship in our marriage had led us to this exact second. My mother hovered quietly near the bed, eyes misting, while Karen, Sarah's mom, bustled around offering advice and fussing with blankets. I stood a few feet back, letting it all wash over me. If you'd frozen time right then, You'd have seen a man convinced his life was solid, unshakable. But time doesn't freeze, and what came next would rip that picture apart in ways I never imagined. Not long after the delivery, a nurse walked in carrying a clipboard, followed by a woman from hospital administration. Her voice was calm, rehearsed. This was routine for her. She explained the paperwork, highlighted where I was supposed to sign, promised a copy would be mailed in a couple of weeks. Standard procedure, nothing unusual. She set the form on the small table beside Sarah's bed. The birth certificate. My name already typed into the father line, waiting only for my signature. The pen rested neatly across the top, like all I had to do was pick it up and make it official. Sarah glanced up at me, cradling our daughter with one arm, smiling like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Honey, why don't you fill it in? I'm a bit tied up right now." The room felt warm, safe, ordinary, but to me that single sheet of paper carried a weight heavier than steel. I looked down at that certificate, my name already printed, the pen gleaming under the fluorescent lights. 18 years of responsibility, locked in with a single stroke. My chest tightened. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner, steady and cold, and somewhere beneath it the faint squeak of the baby nursing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the pen. Instead, I placed my hand flat on the table and said, steady as steel, "Not yet. We wait for the DNA." The words landed like a hammer. The room froze. My mother blinked, stunned. Karen's face twisted in disbelief. Sarah's smile faltered, her hands tightening around the blanket as if she could hide behind the child. I knew what they were thinking, that I was cruel, paranoid, heartless even. But to me, it was simple. Either I was the father, or I was the fool paying for another man's child. The moment the words left my mouth, the delivery room fell silent. It was the kind of silence you don't hear often. Thick, unnatural, like the air itself had been sucked out. The hum of the air conditioner suddenly seemed louder, echoing against the sterile walls. My mother stood stiff by the window, hands clasped tight, her face pale as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Karen, on the other side, narrowed her eyes at me, disbelief hardening into anger. Sarah froze, her forced smile collapsing, her knuckles white as she gripped the baby. The nurse hesitated at the door, eyes darting between us, unsure whether to stay or retreat. Even the newborn sensed it, the tension tightening the air, her soft whimper cutting through the silence. No one moved, no one breathed. And in that frozen moment, I realized I'd lit a fuse. Whatever came next, there was no way back. Sarah's smile vanished completely. Her lips trembled as she clutched the baby tighter, knuckles straining against the white blanket. Her eyes darted toward me, wide and wet, like she couldn't decide whether to plead or lash out. For the first time, I saw her hands shake. Karen broke first. Her voice cut through the heavy air, sharp and furious. "John, are you out of your mind? This is your wife. This is your child. How dare you say something like that?" She stepped closer to the bed as if she could shield Sarah from my words. My mother didn't move. She stood frozen by the window, her face pale, her jaw tight. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was stunned, staring at me like she was trying to understand the man I had just revealed myself to be. 3 women, 3 different reactions, and me, standing in the middle, calm on the outside, but knowing I'd just cracked the world open. Sarah's voice finally broke through the silence, sharp and shaking. "How dare you accuse me of something like this? After everything we've built, after all these years, this is what you think of me?" Her words tumbled out fast, her anger barely covering the fear trembling underneath. Karen echoed her, louder, angrier. "She just gave birth, John. She's exhausted, she's vulnerable, and you choose now to humiliate her? You should be ashamed." My mother stayed quiet, her eyes never leaving me. She wanted answers, but she wasn't going to speak until she heard more. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't match their anger. Instead, I stood there, steady, my hands loose at my sides. "We'll know the truth before I sign," that's all I said. My tone was calm, but every word cut the air like steel on glass. The room was burning with tension, yet I was cold, and I wasn't about to move first. I let the silence stretch just long enough, then spoke the name that had been burning in my chest for months. David Collins. The words hung heavy in the room. Sarah's eyes widened before she could catch herself. Her grip on the baby tightened, her voice rising fast. Absolutely not. That's insane. He's my boss, John. Nothing more. How could you even think? She stopped short, her voice breaking, then forced a shaky laugh. You're paranoid. You've been offshore too long. This is ridiculous. Karen bristled, stepping forward. See? She's shocked. You're imagining things. This is the stress talking. But I'd seen Sarah's face in that first second, the flicker of recognition she tried to bury under denial. I didn't need her to scream or cry to know something was there. I stayed calm, my voice low, steady. Maybe you should tell us why the timing lines up a little too perfectly. And for the first time, she couldn't meet my eyes. Before Sarah could stumble through another excuse, Karen's voice snapped across the room like a whip. Are you out of your mind, John? How dare you say this about my daughter? She just brought your child into the world and you stand here throwing accusations? Shame on you. She moved closer to Sarah's bedside, her hand firm on her daughter's shoulder, her glare locked on me like I was the enemy. Sarah buried her face against the baby, nodding quickly, whispering, See, Mom? He doesn't trust me. He thinks the worst of me. Karen's outrage filled the room, trying to drown out everything else. My mother still stood silent, her face tight, watching. She hadn't spoken yet, but I could see the question in her eyes. Was I certain? I didn't flinch. This isn't madness, I said quietly. It's math. It's time away, and things that don't add up. Sarah shook her head violently, her denial coming fast, almost too fast. I didn't dance around it. I said his name again, slower this time, like I wanted it to stain the air. David Collins. Sarah's boss. The man whose emails kept popping up after hours. The name that started showing up in stories that didn't quite match from one week to the next. Sarah stiffened. Her chin lifted like she was gearing up for a fight, but her eyes flicked away, first to her mother, then to the baby. Anywhere but me. He's my supervisor, John, that's it. You're turning nothing into something because you've been gone too much. Karen squared her shoulders beside the bed. Enough. You will not smear a man's name on the day your child is born. I stayed where I was, voice level. Funny thing about names, they don't smear when they're clean. I let the silence stretch. So I'll ask once, is there any reason David Collins should be anywhere near this conversation? Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, then forced a brittle smile. No. But her hands kept rearranging the blanket over and over, like she needed something to hide behind. Sarah froze like the name had struck her across the face. For a heartbeat, she didn't breathe, didn't blink, just stared at me, lips parted, color draining from her cheeks. Then, as if a switch flipped, the words tumbled out in a rush. That's insane, John. David's my boss. He's married. He's respected. You think I would ever... She shook her head hard, voice climbing higher. No, absolutely not. Absolutely. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the baby's blanket again and again, fingers moving like they needed something to do, something to hide behind. Her eyes darted to Karen, searching for backup, and right on cue her mother snapped, You see? She's shocked. You've lost your mind accusing her like this. I stayed quiet, just watching. Sarah's denial was loud, but the silence underneath it spoke louder. She wasn't outraged. She was afraid. And in that moment, I knew I had pressed the right nerve. I let Sarah's denials echo for a moment before I spoke again. My voice was steady, low, the kind of tone that cuts deeper than shouting. Funny thing, Sarah, because Karen Miller told me a different story. The name hit her like a second blow. Sarah's face tightened, her eyes narrowing. Karen? She's lying. She's always been jealous of me. You can't believe her. But I didn't flinch. Karen told me everything. How David bragged at the office. How he hinted he could keep secrets. He used your name as proof. Karen's knuckles whitened around the baby blanket. That's ridiculous. You're twisting her words. She hates me. I cut her off gently but firmly. She didn't just say your name. She gave details, dates, times, things that lined up perfectly with my offshore schedule. Sarah's lips parted, but no words came. The silence that followed said more than any denial could. Sarah's face flushed red, her voice cracking under the weight of my words. "That's not true. David would never. He promised." She stopped dead, the sentence strangled halfway, but it was too late. The word promised hit the room like a thunderclap. My mother's eyes widened. Karen's hand froze mid-gesture. I didn't need to say a thing. The damage was already done. I tilted my head, letting the silence sharpen the cut. "He promised, huh?" My voice was calm, but the edge was unmistakable. Sarah's hands fumbled with the baby's blanket, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. I didn't mean that. You twisted it. I was upset. I misspoke." But the truth had slipped free, and everyone in the room knew it. My mother folded her arms, lips pressed tight. Even Karen's face wavered, confusion slipping through her anger. Sarah looked back at me, desperate now, but there was no taking those words back. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again, her fury faltering into something else, confusion. She looked down at her daughter, eyes narrowing, voice sharper now but tinged with fear. "Sarah, what did you mean by that? Who promised you anything?" Sarah shook her head quickly, clutching the baby tighter. "Mom, no. He's twisting everything. He's trying to break us apart." Her words came fast, desperate, like she could plaster over the crack that had already split wide open. But Karen didn't let it go. She turned to me, her voice unsteady. "John, what exactly did Karen Miller tell you?" I held her gaze. "Enough. Enough to know this isn't just paranoia. Enough to know David wasn't keeping his mouth shut." Karen's eyes flicked back to Sarah, searching her face for honesty, for some solid ground. But Sarah wouldn't meet her mother's stare. And in that silence, the first seed of doubt had been planted, right where Sarah least expected it. I didn't give Sarah a chance to gather herself. My voice cut through the tension, slow and deliberate. This wasn't some one-time mistake. This went on for 6 months. The words hit heavier than any shout could. My mother stiffened by the window. Karen's face drained, her hand slipping from Sarah's shoulder. Sarah's head shook violently. No, that's not true. You're exaggerating, twisting things. It wasn't." She stopped herself, realizing too late she'd given away more than she should. I stepped closer, not loud, just certain. 6 months. Every detail lines up with my time offshore. The nights I was gone, the weekends I wasn't there. That's when it happened. And when you found out you were pregnant, you ended it. Not because you loved me, but because you were terrified of whose baby it might be. Sarah's lips parted, trembling, but no sound came. And in that silence, the weight of 6 months pressed down on everyone in that room. Sarah shook her head so hard it looked painful, words spilling out between shallow breaths. "No, it's not true, John. You've got it wrong. They're lying to you, trying to poison you against me. I would never—" Her voice cracked, and suddenly the fury drained away, leaving nothing but raw desperation. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she clutched the baby closer, rocking gently like the child could shield her from the truth closing in. "Please," she sobbed, "don't do this here. Not in front of them. Not on the day our daughter was born." Her words were shaky, broken, but they couldn't cover the fear underneath. Karen bent over her, whispering comfort, but even she looked unsettled now, her eyes darting between me and her daughter. I stood rooted, steady, my voice low. "The truth doesn't wait for timing, Sarah. It shows up whether you're ready or not." And judging by her tears, she was anything but ready. Her sobs filled the room, sharp and uneven, but I didn't let them sway me. I kept my voice low, steady, almost quiet, because quiet cuts deeper. "You keep calling him just a friend," I said, eyes locked on hers. "But friends don't promise secrets." The words landed heavy. Sarah flinched like I'd struck her. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, searching for something, anything, that might erase what I'd just said. Nothing came. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her confidence faltering. My mother still hadn't moved, arms crossed, her silence heavier than judgment. The nurse by the door shifted uncomfortably, like even she knew we were past the point of pretending. Sarah wiped at her face with the back of her hand, voice breaking. "It wasn't like that, John. You're twisting everything. I swear, it wasn't what you think." But I held firm. "No, Sarah, it was exactly what I think." And the walls were closing in fast. The weight in the room shifted as both mothers found their voices. Karen straightened beside Sarah, her tone sharp, almost desperate. "John, enough. She just gave birth. Do you understand the stress you're putting her under? You're destroying your family over rumors." Her hand rested firmly on Sarah's shoulder, as though she could anchor her daughter against the truth pressing down. Across the room, my mother finally broke her silence. Her voice was low but carried a steel edge I knew too well. "If it's just rumors, then why does Sarah look so afraid? Why can't she answer you straight, John?" Karen whipped her head toward her, bristling. "Because she's exhausted, because he's attacking her in the most vulnerable moment of her life." But my mother didn't flinch. She stepped closer, eyes on Sarah, voice steady. "Exhaustion doesn't make you promise another man's secrets." The two women stood divided, and in the middle, Sarah's silence grew louder than all of them. Sarah's whole body trembled as if the hospital gown couldn't keep her warm. She rocked the baby tighter against her chest, her eyes fixed anywhere but on me. First the blanket, then the floor tiles, then the window. Anywhere safe, anywhere that didn't demand the truth. "John, please," she whispered, voice thin, barely holding together. "This isn't the time. We should be celebrating her birth, not tearing each other apart." It sounded rehearsed, hollow, like a line meant to stall rather than soothe. My mother's eyes narrowed, catching the evasion. Karen pressed her lips together, no longer shouting, but confusion flickered across her face. I stepped closer, slow, measured. "You can't even look at me, Sarah. You can face your mother, you can face the nurse, but not me. That tells me everything I need to know." Her fingers fidgeted endlessly with the baby's blanket. And still, her eyes stayed down, like the truth itself would burn if she dared to meet mine. I drew in a slow breath, keeping my eyes locked on Sarah even though she refused to lift hers. "You want details? Fine, let's talk about time." I pulled the dates from memory, etched there by long nights replaying everything. First week of July, I was offshore. I didn't step foot back in Houston until the end of that week. But that's exactly when David started bragging at the office. August, I was gone 3 straight weekends. And somehow, Sarah, that's when you suddenly had work dinners and late nights that never lined up with what you told me later. Sarah's lips pressed tight, her eyes still fixed on the floor. I pressed harder. "Every time I was out in the Gulf, David was in town. And every story I've heard about the two of you lines up perfectly with my offshore schedule." The room felt smaller, walls closing in, because the truth wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was math. Sarah's breathing grew shallow, her shoulders rising and falling as if the air itself had turned heavy. She finally lifted her eyes just for a second, and in that moment I saw it. The crack. "Okay, maybe I spent time with him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But it wasn't what you think. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean—" Her words collapsed into sobs before she could finish. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she rocked the baby, her cries mixing with the infant's restless whimpers. Karen froze beside her, shock spreading across her face. My mother's jaw tightened, the confirmation settling in like a weight she'd always feared was coming. I stood still, steady, my chest burning but my voice calm. "It doesn't matter what you call it, Sarah. Time, secret, mistake. 6 months is 6 months." Her tears only grew harder. Because once the wall of denial cracks, there's no way to build it back again. I let her sobs fill the room for a moment before I spoke. My voice was even, each word sharp and deliberate. "You lied, Sarah. Not once, not twice. 6 months of lies stacked one on top of the other." She shook her head wildly, whispering between tears. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I was lonely, John. I thought it would stop." I cut her off. "Lonely doesn't last 6 months, and lonely doesn't end the moment you find out you're pregnant. That's not loneliness. That's betrayal." My mother's eyes were hard, unblinking. Karen's face had gone pale, her hand slipping from her daughter's shoulder. I stepped back, needing space, the weight of it pressing against my chest. "You've already given me my answer. Whatever excuses you try now, the truth is simple. The trust is gone." And without trust, I knew there was no marriage left to save. After my words, the room seemed to lose all warmth. The hum of the hospital machines was the only sound, steady but hollow, like a reminder that life was moving on even as ours stood shattered. Sarah sat slumped against the pillows, tears streaking her face, clutching the baby so tightly it looked as if she feared we might rip her away. Her sobs had quieted into small, broken gasps. Karen stood stiff beside the bed, pale and rigid, eyes darting between me and her daughter. For the first time, she didn't rush to defend Sarah. She looked like a woman caught between anger and dread, unsure which way to lean. My mother crossed her arms, her jaw set. She didn't say a word, but the silence in her gaze told me she agreed with what I'd just spoken. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that comes after an explosion, when everyone realizes nothing will ever look the same again. Through the heavy silence, Sarah's voice broke, trembling and raw. "John, please. We can fix this." She reached out with her free hand, fingers shaking, as if the simple act of touching me could bridge the canyon between us. Tears streaked her face, dripping onto the baby's blanket as she rocked gently, murmuring to soothe the child even as her own body shook. I know I made mistakes. I was scared. I was lonely. But you and we're stronger than this. We can get through it. For her. For us. Karen gripped her daughter's shoulder, nodding quickly, latching onto the words. "She's right, John. Don't throw everything away. Every marriage has storms." But I stood rooted, my chest tight, my jaw locked. I let the plea hang in the air, heavy and desperate, before I answered. "The mistake wasn't the storm, Sarah. The mistake was thinking we could build a family on lies." I shook my head slowly, the weight of her words bouncing off me like dull echoes. My voice came out flat, steady, stripped of any softness. "The mistake wasn't the storm, Sarah. The mistake was thinking we had a family." Her face crumpled, a fresh wave of tears spilling down as she clutched the baby tighter, rocking harder now, as if motion alone could keep her world from collapsing. Karen gasped, covering her mouth with one hand. "John, don't say that. Don't you dare." But I didn't flinch. I looked at Sarah, at the broken trust between us, and I felt the truth settle like cold steel in my chest. Families are built on honesty, on loyalty. What we had, it was something else. Something built on sand. The room went still again, heavy with the kind of silence that follows a sentence you can't take back. And in that silence, I knew. Nothing in this house would ever be the same. I straightened slowly, the chair legs scraping against the tile as I pushed back. The sound seemed to echo louder than it should have, cutting through the room like a blade. Sarah's tear-streaked face lifted toward me, eyes wide, searching for something, mercy, forgiveness, anything. Karen gripped her arm, whispering frantically while my mother stood still, watching in silence. I pulled in a steady breath. 72 hours, I said, my tone calm, final. That's all. The DNA will speak, and when it does, there'll be no more arguing, no more denials. We'll all know the truth. The words hung heavy. Sarah shook her head, sobbing harder. "John, please, don't leave like this. Please." But I was already stepping back, putting space between us. "I'm not signing anything until science tells me who I am to that child." The baby whimpered softly in her arms, the sound filling the silence I left behind as I turned toward the door. The automatic doors slid open, spilling me into the humid Houston night. The hospital's fluorescent glow stretched across the parking lot, but it felt cold, distant, like light from another world I no longer belonged to. I walked without direction, my boots heavy against the concrete, every step dragging me deeper into the pit that had just opened beneath my life. For 6 years I thought I was building something unshakable, a marriage, a home, a family. In the space of one hospital room, it had all collapsed like glass dropped on tile. The air was thick, heavy with summer heat, but inside I felt nothing but cold. My chest hollowed out, every breath sharp, as if the ground itself had been ripped from under me. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just kept walking into the night, feeling like a man who'd stepped out of one life and into a hole so deep he couldn't see the bottom. Back at my apartment in Houston, the silence felt like it had weight. No baby cries, No Sarah humming in the kitchen, just the low hum of the fridge and the faint traffic outside. I dropped my keys on the counter and stared at the walls, blank and unfamiliar, like I'd just moved into someone else's life. I sat at the edge of the bed, phone in hand, thumb hovering over a number I never thought I'd need. My lawyer. We'd spoken years ago about property paperwork, nothing more. Now I was calling him to discuss divorce, custody, child support, words that tasted like ash. When his voice came through the line, steady and professional, I laid it out flat. The affair, the doubts, the DNA test in motion. He didn't gasp or pity me. He just started explaining next steps, protections, documents I needed ready. By the time I hung up, the decision felt sealed. I wasn't waiting for Sarah anymore. I was preparing for war. The next morning, I forced myself into motion. No more pacing the apartment, no more replaying the delivery room in my head. If Sarah had burned the bridge, then I was laying bricks on my own side to move forward. I drove back to the house we'd shared, not to argue, not to confront, but to collect what mattered. Important papers, bank records, a few personal things I couldn't replace. My lawyer's voice echoed in my head. Separate finances now. Protect your accounts. Don't leave anything to chance. I moved through each room like a ghost, ignoring the framed photos on the wall, the smell of fresh paint still lingering in the nursery. I didn't touch the crib, didn't touch the tiny socks folded neatly in the drawer. Those things didn't belong to me anymore, not until the DNA said otherwise. By the time I closed the door behind me, the house didn't feel like mine. It felt like a crime scene. That night, just as I was sorting through a stack of papers on my kitchen table, my phone buzzed. The name lit up the screen. Tom Miller, a buddy from offshore, the kind of man who never called without a reason. His voice was low, heavy. "John, we need to talk. It's about David Collins." I leaned back in the chair, grip tightening on the phone. "Go ahead." Tom didn't hesitate. He's been bragging. Not just about Sarah, about others. Karen told me the whole story. Apparently he's made a habit of chasing married women at the office. My wife almost got caught up in it. She backed out when she realized who he really was. The room around me seemed to shrink. My suspicion hadn't just been right. It was part of something bigger. Tom's voice hardened. "John, you're not alone in this. There are more of us. David's been leaving a trail, and it's only a matter of time before it all comes out." The next evening I met Tom at a sports bar off the freeway, the kind of place with neon lights humming over the pool tables and TVs stuck on endless loops of highlights. We found a quiet corner booth, 2 beers set down in front of us. Tom didn't waste time. He laid it all out. Names, dates, whispers from wives who had suddenly changed their schedules, husbands who'd started asking questions. Every thread led back to the same man, David Collins. I listened in silence, the knot in my chest tightening. For months I'd carried the weight of betrayal like it was mine alone, a private hell I couldn't share. But sitting there across from Tom, I realized it wasn't just me. David had carved a path through other marriages, other homes, leaving wreckage in his wake. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. And I sure as hell wasn't the only victim. Tom picked the spot, Buffalo Wild Wings on the west side of Houston. The place buzzed with Friday night noise, wings sizzling from the kitchen, bartenders shouting orders, TVs flashing football highlights. But in the back corner, away from the noise, it was just the 2 of us. Tom leaned across the table, his voice low but edged with anger. "It's bigger than I thought, John. David's been through more than just Sarah. My wife told me he's tangled with at least 3 others. Married women. All of them." I sat there staring into my beer, the bitter taste sitting heavy on my tongue. For months I thought my world was uniquely shattered, but now it was clear. I was part of a pattern. Tom's eyes narrowed. "We can't keep quiet about this. If he's done it to us, he'll do it again. Someone has to stop him." I nodded slowly. For the first time, my anger had direction. Over baskets of half-eaten wings and sweating glasses of beer, Tom and I laid our stories side by side. Different women, different timelines, but the pattern was identical. Tom told me how his wife, Karen, had come home one night pale and shaken. David had cornered her after a work function, dropping hints about his discretion. bragging about past conquests like it was some kind of trophy case. He used names, details, dates, things only an arrogant man would share. I listened, nodding slowly, then added my own. Sarah's late nights, the suspicious gaps when I was offshore, her trembling hands the moment I said his name. The more we compared, the clearer it became. David wasn't stumbling into mistakes. He was hunting, choosing women whose husbands were distracted, on duty, offshore, working long hours. I looked across the table, meeting Tom's eyes. We didn't have to say it out loud. We both knew this wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern. By the time the plates were cleared, Tom leaned in, his voice dropping low. "It's not just our wives, John. I can feel it. David's done this before, and he'll do it again. We need to find out who else." I nodded slowly, the weight of it settling heavy in my chest. Then we start asking questions, quietly, man to man. Husbands deserve to know if they've been living in the dark like me. Tom tapped his fingers against the table, jaw tight. "Mike Reynolds, he's on the force. His wife used to work with David. Don Coleman, too. Both of them have been suspicious, but nobody's put the pieces together." The thought of other men blindsided the way I had been made my stomach churn. But at the same time, it gave me purpose. This wasn't just my fight anymore. I drained the last of my beer and set the glass down hard. "All right, then let's bring the others in." A week later, Tom set it up. We met again, this time in the back room of a dimly lit bar off I-10, the kind of place where no one asked questions if you stayed too long over cold coffee. Mike Reynolds walked in still in uniform, badge glinting under the neon light. His face was carved in stone, jaw clenched tight. He didn't bother with small talk. He just sat, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Sarah wasn't the only one. My wife, Sarah Reynolds, too. David Collins got to her." The words hit like a second betrayal. Not mine this time, but proof of the pattern. Mike laid out the late nights, the secretive texts, the shift in behavior he'd tried to ignore. As he spoke, the pieces lined up too perfectly. Tom, Mike, me. We weren't outliers. We were a list. Mike's eyes burned. This man's been wrecking homes, and I'm done letting him hide in plain sight. Not long after Mike finished speaking, the door creaked open again. Don Coleman stepped inside, broad-shouldered, still in his work clothes, grease on his hands like he'd come straight from the shop. He didn't order a drink. He didn't even sit right away. His eyes swept the room, then landed on us. "So it's true," he muttered, voice rough. "I thought I was imagining it. Jessica's late nights, the excuses. Turns out David Collins was the common thread." He finally slid into the chair across from me, his fists balled on the table. Tom nodded, leaning forward. "You're not imagining it. We've all seen the same signs. Different women, same man." Don let out a bitter laugh, no humor in it. "Hell of a thing. I thought my marriage was bulletproof. Guess David proved otherwise." The table fell into a grim silence. 4 men now, different lives, but bound together by one name. And the list was still growing. The 4 of us sat there in the low light, the weight of our stories stacking like bricks on the same wall. Different wives, same lies. Different homes, same destruction. It wasn't coincidence. It was predation. Mike leaned in, his cop's voice steady, controlled. "We can't just sit on this. Men like David keep going until someone stops them. If we each know a piece of his trail, then together we've got the whole map." Don slammed a fist lightly against the table. "So what do we do? Go to HR? To the cops? He'll deny it. He'll spin it like we're jealous, bitter husbands." I stared into my glass, then raised my eyes to meet theirs. "We don't go to him. We go to the others. Every husband he's touched, every family he's tried to poison, they deserve to know. Once the truth spreads, he won't have anywhere to hide." Tom nodded slowly. The first step was clear. The room went quiet after my words, each of us turning the thought over in our heads. Mike broke the silence first. "If we go at him reckless, it backfires. Men like David thrive on chaos. He'll twist it, turn us into the villains. I've seen it before." Don's fists unclenched slowly, his shoulders still tight. "So we don't swing fists. We don't need to. The truth itself is heavy enough. Tom nodded, leaning forward. Exactly, we collect facts, timelines, witnesses, every piece of his bragging, every woman he's targeted. When it all comes together, the story tells itself. I stared at the condensation sliding down my glass, then lifted my eyes. No shouting matches, no public scenes, just the truth, laid bare. Once it's out, his reputation won't survive it. That's the punishment. Mike's jaw tightened, but he agreed. Fine. We don't touch him. We just make sure no one else does. For the first time, our path felt solid. We all agreed. No reckless violence, no fists, no midnight visits to David's house. Just the truth. On the surface, it sounded clean, disciplined, but underneath, the anger was boiling. Don leaned back, jaw tight, eyes burning. Truth is fine, but it doesn't erase what he took. Doesn't erase the image of my wife lying to me night after night while he strutted around bragging. Mike's knuckles tapped the table, steady, controlled, but hard enough to rattle the empty glasses. Men like him don't stop just because they're embarrassed. Sometimes embarrassment isn't enough. I felt it too, that gnawing hunger for more than just exposure, for retribution, for balance. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing my voice calm. We'll stick to the plan. Truth first. But if he keeps pushing... I let the words hang, unfinished. No one spoke. But in that silence, every man at that table thought the same thing. Some debts need heavier payment. Even as the circle widened, more husbands whispering their suspicions, more names quietly added to David's trail. I carried a weight heavier than all of it. The DNA test. 72 hours. That's what I'd told them. But in truth, every hour since had felt like a lifetime. I'd wake in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, wondering which future was waiting inside that sealed envelope. If the child was mine, then I'd be bound to Sarah forever, even if love was gone. Bound by duty, by blood, by 18 years of responsibility. If she wasn't mine, then everything ended. Marriage, fatherhood, even the idea of the life I thought we were building. I carried that question like a stone in my chest. And no matter how many men joined our circle, no matter how many stories we uncovered about David, I knew one truth mattered most. Was I a father, or just the fool she chose to sign? As the days crawled by, more men joined us, names whispered in confidence, faces tight with the same hollow look I saw in the mirror. At first, each thought he was alone, that his wife's betrayal was some private shame to carry. But when they heard David's name, the same pattern, the same excuses, something shifted. We weren't strangers anymore. We were brothers in betrayal. Around that table, the anger wasn't just mine. It was shared. The humiliation of being the last to know. The nights replayed in our heads, wondering where she really was. The sting of realizing another man had been smiling behind our backs while we worked, while we sacrificed. There's a particular ache that comes with betrayal. It isn't just pain. It's the ripping away of pride, of trust, of the image you built of yourself as a husband, a protector. And sitting shoulder to shoulder, we all felt it. Different marriages, same wound. 72 hours. 3 days that dragged like 3 years. And then it came. The knock at my apartment door, a courier handing me a plain envelope thick with finality. No drama, no warning, just a piece of paper that held the weight of my future. I closed the door and stood in the quiet, staring at it. My hands didn't move right away. The seal looked ordinary, but to me it was a fuse waiting to be lit. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten countless dinners with Sarah, where we once planned names for a baby that might not even be mine. My chest tightened, a cold heaviness spreading through me. I ran my thumb along the edge of the envelope. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. Every man who had sat at that table with me, Tom, Mike, Don, they carried their own wounds. But this answer was mine alone, and there was no hiding from it. I brought the envelope to Sarah's mother's house where she was staying with the baby. My mother was already there, arms folded, her face tight. Sarah sat on the couch, pale, clutching the child like she could shield herself from what was coming. Karen hovered close, whispering comfort that sounded hollow even to her own ears. I didn't sit. I stood in the middle of the room and tore the envelope open. My eyes went straight to the only line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. The paper slipped from my hand, landing softly on the carpet. My voice came out flat, stripped of everything. She's not mine. Sarah's sob broke the silence, sharp and jagged. Karen gasped, covering her mouth. My mother just closed her eyes, the confirmation cutting deeper than any guess. I didn't reach for Sarah. I didn't reach for the child. I just stood there, staring at the truth in black and white, and in that moment, something inside me finally went dead. Sarah crumpled where she sat, her sobs breaking into the stillness like glass shattering on tile. She buried her face against the baby's blanket, rocking back and forth as if motion alone could undo the words written on that paper. "I'm sorry," she gasped through the tears, over and over, the words spilling uselessly, offering no answer, no repair. Karen dropped to her knees beside her daughter, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. But even she looked hollow, her face drawn tight with helplessness. For days she had fought to shield Sarah from suspicion, from judgment. Now the truth was in plain ink, undeniable, and there was nothing left for her to argue. My mother stayed standing, silent, her arms crossed over her chest, gaze fixed on Sarah with a mixture of sadness and disgust. I stood still, my voice calm, final. "This marriage is over. The divorce papers will come this week." No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. I bent down, picked the paper back up from the carpet, and held it between two fingers like it was evidence in a trial. My eyes stayed on Sarah, broken on the couch, her tears soaking into the baby's blanket. My voice came out flat, unshaken, the words slicing through the room. "She's not mine." The sentence landed heavier than any shout. Sarah's sobs grew harsher, her shoulders shaking. Karen clutched her daughter tighter, whispering, begging me to take it back, to soften, to find some trace of mercy. But I had none left to give. My mother moved toward the door with me, her silence standing as the only support I needed. I folded the paper once, slipped it back into the envelope, and turned without another word. The house felt smaller as I walked out, the weight behind me pressing like a coffin lid closing. I didn't look back. Some doors don't deserve to be opened twice. The next morning I walked into my lawyer's office with the envelope still in my hand. I didn't need to explain much, just dropped the papers on his desk and said, "File it." He scanned the result, then nodded, his pen already moving across the forms he'd prepared. "This makes it clean. Property, finances, custody, you won't be tied to Sarah or the child." Hearing it said out loud was like ripping the last thread. 6 years of marriage reduced to lines on a legal document. No more shared accounts, no more joint property, no more pretending. I signed where he pointed, the scratch of the pen loud in the quiet room. With every signature I felt something close inside me. Not relief, not anger, just finality. When it was done, I slid the papers back across the desk. That's it. She's out of my life. For the first time since that hospital room, the path ahead looked brutally, coldly clear. By the end of that week, the whispers had turned into a current running through Houston's west side. At bars, at church gatherings, in office hallways, the name David Collins carried a different weight now. Not the boss, not the successful executive. It was Predator. Every man who'd sat in that back room with me had started talking, quietly but firmly. Mike shared what he knew with other officers. Tom confided in coworkers. Don dropped hints at the garage, and those hints traveled fast. Soon, more husbands were checking calendars, connecting dots, realizing their late meetings and business trips lined up a little too neatly with David's charm. By the time I heard his name again, it wasn't spoken with respect. It was spoken with anger, with disgust. David wasn't hiding in plain sight anymore. He was standing in a spotlight he couldn't control, and the city was starting to turn against him. It didn't take long before rumors turned into something harder, sharper. One night, word spread through our circle before it even hit the news. David Collins had been found outside his upscale subdivision, bruised, bloodied, wrists bound. A neighbor said he was half-conscious on the sidewalk, mumbling about shadows, about voices. By morning, the story hit local chatter. Accident. That's what the police called it. No suspects, no clear cause. Just David in the hospital, broken ribs, concussion, unable to walk without help. Officially, it was a mystery. Unofficially, no one was surprised. Too many enemies. Too many betrayed men with too much to lose. When Tom called me that night, his voice was low. Whoever did it, they knew what they were doing. Sledgehammer, John. Went straight for the legs. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. Some things aren't written in police reports. Some debts get collected in the dark. Within days, the city was buzzing. At coffee shops, at job sites, even in the pews on Sunday morning, the story was the same. David Collins got what was coming to him. No one said it outright, but you could hear it in the tone. No sympathy, no shock. Just the quiet certainty that a line had finally been drawn. I overheard a man at the hardware store mutter to his buddy, "Some debts don't get paid in court." His friend just nodded, neither of them looking up. David lay in a hospital bed somewhere, bruised and broken, while whispers of his name rolled across Houston like wildfire. But instead of pity, there was only disgust. Families he'd toyed with now avoided his name like a curse. Husbands he'd laughed behind were standing taller, their shame replaced by something colder. David's downfall wasn't an accident, it was a reckoning, and everyone knew it. For weeks, the 3-pound sledgehammer sat in the back of my closet, its handle worn smooth, its head scuffed and dark. I never asked where it came from, never needed to. Just knowing it was there was enough. A symbol of everything David took and everything he lost. Every time I saw it, I felt the pull of anger, the illusion of control. But deep down, I knew the truth. As long as I held on to it, I wasn't free. One night on the rig, the gulf spread out black and endless beneath me. I carried the hammer to the rail. The salt air stung my face, diesel humming in the wind. I turned it once in my hand, cold, heavy, a relic of rage, then swung my arm and let it go. The splash was small, but the release was not. For the first time since that hospital room, I could breathe. Months later, on a quiet autumn afternoon in Houston, I met Lily at a friend's backyard barbecue. No drama, no fireworks, just a calm smile, a steady presence. She listened when I spoke, didn't pry when I hesitated, and for the first time in years, I felt myself breathing without weight on my chest. Piece by piece, we built something new. Coffee mugs side by side in the cupboard. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market. Long walks where silence wasn't heavy. It was safe. I learned the hardest truth. Healing isn't forgetting. It's choosing to rebuild. The past will always leave scars, but scars aren't chains. They're proof you survived. Brad, Sarah, the lies, the hammer, all of it will always be part of my story. But they don't define me anymore. Lily does. The future does. So I'll leave you with this. What would you have done in my shoes?